thoughts, and then we can have maybe some moment of discussion, questions, answers coming from the network. So we are today about some 20 partners, 20 people from, probably 15 partners or so across Europe, joining you from the StartNet network on school to work transition. And really looking forward to your input. Thank you, Hans, for making it.
Well, thank you, Jan, and pleasure to see you and to see so many young faces on the screen. I opened a secondary school teachers conference last Thursday in Rotterdam, and there I used the expression that talent is the most precious resource we have, that we should allocate to overcome the most pressing challenges we have. So that is indeed one of the reasons why already since 2005 I've been working on the EU STEM talent pipeline. Pipeline not only because of the industry where I came from, but also because talent development is a pipeline development, because you need to work for input, that people are interested in STEM, or now has become STEAM topic, but not everything that you put in the pipeline also comes out at the other end of the pipeline, because you may have leakages. So you also have to do leak management, which means checking where people perhaps lose their motivation or have barriers and how you can overcome them, so that as large a percentage of people that go in the pipeline also come out of the pipeline. And so just like physical pipeline management, you need three things. You need input management, throughput management, and output management. So input management means how can we make young people interested and enthusiastic for STEM topics? Then secondly, how do we guide them throughout their school career in actually making it until the very end? And I'll tell in a minute why that is important. And then once, and this is perhaps most relevant for what you do, once they come out of education and go into the world of employment, what then can we do to help them? Now, I think you all understand that if you would be a regular runner, like running half marathons or just a round in the park, if you do that regularly for a few years, then after a few years, I can actually measure a physical difference in your lungs. Namely, the oxygenating capacity of your lungs has increased. If instead you would, for a few years, do weightlifting, then after a few years, I could physically measure an increase in your muscular mass as a result of that exercise. Now, many people do not realize that if you do a few years of STEM, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, some even include geography in there, if you do that for a few years, as a result of that, there is a physical difference in the brain. The brain becomes a better brain. Comparable to if you are a big truck and you get to a town, then you can do two things. Either you can go straight ahead through the old city center, over the bridges, sharp curves, etc., and it takes you ages. Or you can see the circular round way around the city and say, okay, this is the city, I need to transit the city, so I very quickly go to the other point. So there's actually a physical difference to the brains as a result of STEM education. Now, people always say that I'm a typical engineer, and I have to disappoint them. I'm not an engineer, but indeed I've worked for 30 years with engineers, and I can't help it that, it gets all over me. I think that my gift is that I can explain technically difficult things in simple terms. That is a skill as well. So the reason why in 2015 I co-founded the EU STEM Coalition, which now has some 65 platforms in Europe. They are either regional, national, or pan-European, to foster enthusiasm of young children for STEM, is not because I think we need more engineers, but I do think, and that's the first point I want to share with you, is that we need more systemic thinking. And I always write that SISTEMic, then I write SI small, STEM big, and then IC at the end. Now, of course, with the two previous education commissioners, Tibor Navracsic and Maria Gabriel, who actually just left for Bulgaria, where she became the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and she's most likely to become the Premier of Bulgaria next year. But when we worked with them on this, it was precisely for that competence in society. Now, I'm a Dutchman, and when I went to school, which is quite a number of years ago, as you can see from the color of my hair, we had to learn swimming at school. Now that actually is a very good thing, because in the Netherlands there's a lot of waters, canals and lakes and rivers, etc., etc. It's a big river delta with lots of tributaries. So the likelihood that a Dutch girl or a Dutch boy ends up with his or her bicycle in the water is considerably bigger than, for example, in the Bavarian forest. There you have other problems. So training young people to swim in a country where the likelihood that you fall in water is reality proof and future proof, because the likelihood that it may occur is quite considerable. Now, to my surprise, I found out that it's no longer a mandatory topic in the Netherlands at school, because the government has withdrawn the funds for doing that. So children still learn to swim if their parents can afford the course. So what happens now in the Netherlands when a young boy or girl falls into the water, if it's a boy or girl from a family that can afford to give swimming lessons, they can come out of the water. And if they were born in a family where they couldn't afford that, they may drown. And in actual fact, the number of child drownings in the Netherlands has gone up. Now, what does that have to do with what you do and systemic thinking? Well, if we as citizens of the 21st century want to be reality proof and future proof, the most important competence that we need to have is systemic thinking. And many people say, you mean system thinking? No, systemic thinking. You mean systematic thinking? No, systemic thinking. What is systemic thinking? And I thought I had invented the word myself, but there are very few things that you actually really invent. So I came across it in other texts that I did not know about. So at least other people have thought the same. But my meaning of systemic thinking is three things. First of all, it is critical thinking. Secondly, it is logical thinking. And thirdly, it is holistic thinking. Now, I've got three boys, and they're now students, but when they came home, when they were secondary school, they came home, I've heard this and this and this. And I said, wow, that's pretty steep information. Do you know who said this? Well, no, I heard it somewhere. I said, that's already not a very trustworthy source. It's not a Harvard professor of whom you know the name. I mean, maybe it was just somebody who said it on Facebook. But I said, let's assume it's true. What you just heard is true. How does that fit logically with other things in the same area? For example, if I make an extreme example, if somebody says apples actually do not fall down, when they come loose, they fall up. Imagine. So gravity does not exist. Now, of course, if you think about it logically, you say, well, wait a sec, that cannot really be true, because I can clearly see the furniture in my room solidly standing on the floor, and I see the cars solidly standing on the streets. So that's a form of, you hear something, who is saying it, how trustworthy is it, how logical is it with compared to other things I know. And then if you go the next step, then you say holistically, well, if this is going to be the case, what might actually happen in the future? Now, the difference between sight and vision is that vision is a capacity to see weak signals of things that will become visible to the eye. So if somebody says to me, I can see tomato on my plate, and I see the tomato as well, I'm not going to pay him for that, because that is not a real strong competence to see a tomato on a plate. Now, if somebody can tell me within 5 minutes there will be a tomato on my plate and I can't see it now, and somehow within 5 minutes somebody is serving the tomato, then I'm impressed. Now, maybe I did not know that that person actually ordered a salad with tomatoes, and therefore it ended up on his plate. Now, why I'm taking these simple examples? We are all, most of you are born in the 21st century. I'm a fossil from the previous century. But this century is actually also called the exponential century. And I hope you know what the difference is between a linear development and an exponential development. So exponential thinking in a linear way about exponential developments has the same effect as driving a car and coming to a curve and not do anything with the steering wheel. We all know what happens. You go through the barrier and you get off the road. There are many, many exponential trends going on right now. And we cannot approach them with a linear thinking approach, because that's a guarantee for excellence. And so that is why I have decided already many years ago that I would work hard on STEAM skills. The A, by the way, some people say it stands for all other skills. Some say it stands for arts. or the communications, which of course is also important. The reason why we selected STEM is not that I find them more important skills than law or history or languages or art, but it is the skill set where we got the biggest shortage. And all you know is that a chain is as strong as the weakest link. If you have a pipeline or a process and you want to de-bottleneck the process, you always go for the biggest bottleneck. But once you've de-bottlenecked that barrier, something else becomes the next bottleneck. So at this moment in time, the biggest bottleneck is a shortage of systemic thinking in society. And the best way to address that is to make sure that as many people as possible enjoy STEM education for the things it does to their brains physically, and therefore their ability to, first of all, if they become very senior in life, in their careers, they become policy advisors or maybe ministers or managers or CEOs, that they can actually formulate strategies that indeed are systemically sound and contribute to humanity's well-being. But even for people that are not such high flyers, they need to have systemic capacity as well, because communication is not what you say. Communication is what the other understands. And so I talk with a lot of politicians and policymakers, and they say, well, yes, Mr. van der Loo, you're right, but you see, if I would propose that, I will lose the next elections. So maybe you come back after next summer, because next May we got elections. And I don't know whether you know the expression two-component glue. You know, I don't know how many of you do DIY. That typically is sold in like 2 plastic syringes, and you must not bring them together, because if you bring them together, it's a very, very strong glue. And the strongest two-component glue in the world is the combination of NIMBY and NIMTO. NIMBY, many of you may have heard of, that's not in my backyard. So that's with the citizens. Brilliant idea, but please, not in my backyard, put them somewhere else, for example, windmills or whatever. Now, NIMTO, fewer of you may have heard of, but that's similar, so not in my backyard for the citizens, and NIMTO stands for not in my term of office. So here we have politicians who understand the necessity to do a certain thing, but dare not say it before the next elections because they are afraid of the consequences. So also at a citizens level, it is important that the STEM skills, the systemic thinking is developed so that they at least understand why certain policy measures are being announced. They may not like it, but at least in their heart of hearts, they say, well, I actually don't like it, but I understand that he or she actually is right. Now, let me see, provided that it's done equitably, honestly, so also my neighbors do it, and the poor shoulders get some extra support to do it as well, and by the way, the minister does it himself as well, then maybe grudgingly, I can agree. But the condition for that to exist is that systemic thinking is a capacity that exists throughout our society. I would go as far to say that systemic thinking and the widespread presence of systemic thinking in the 21st century is an existential condition for humanity to reach the 22nd century in a civilized and peaceful way. Some people say we may be in the process of the 6th mass extinction. Well, that may be or may not be the case, but I can assure you in 2100, well, I won't be there, but many of you will be, and so will be my kids. But I do not want you or my children just to arrive in 2100. I want you to get there in a civilized and peaceful way, because the road towards a goal is as important as the goal or the destination itself. So I want to conclude with 2 final remarks, and then as Jan suggested, we can do some Q&A. So sometimes I say the new, well, one step back, you probably all know, because you are in that sphere of helping youngsters to go from education to employment, that in Europe we actually have a big problem with education. This is quite surprising because, you know, we are by many deemed to be, you know, a very highly developed region, you know, with very good quality education. But it may surprise you that 1 in 5 15-year-olds in Europe is functionally illiterate. They may be able to read some words, but they cannot comprehend a text. And out of the 500 million European citizens, 75 million adults are functionally illiterate. So how can those people acquire knowledge? How can those people inform themselves about the situation that we're in? How can those people form an opinion about the policy proposals that leaders in government or in their company may propose? So I actually propose that, of course, we need to continue with basic literacy and numeracy training. And in numeracy, I often say we should not learn them facts. We should learn them to ask the right questions. And then people say, well, that sounds very nice, but can you give an example? And I say, yes. So it's now 10:30. So we'll have lunch in 1.5 hours. Now imagine you're very hungry and you want to have as much carbohydrates on your plate for lunch as you can. And the choice is the following. You can either have the quarter of a big pizza or half of a small pizza. Now, what question do you need to ask to make sure you get as much pizza on your plate as possible? Well, there are 3 things. First of all, you have to understand the concept of what is a quarter. Then you need to understand what is half of something. And then you need to understand what's the relationship between half and a quarter. Now, once you figure that one out, the question could be, is the big pizza more or less than 2 times bigger than the small pizza? If that is the case, you want a quarter of the big pizza. And if it's not the case, you want half of the small pizza. So the ability to ask that kind of question actually is only the result of a deep systemic insight. So I would say we should teach children to ask the right questions rather than to give the right answers. Because, all of us, we can be given a difficult question and with 5 minutes, we have a reasonable answer thanks to internet and mobile phones. Now, for the people that you work with, who go from education to employment, this asking questions is important as well. And it goes back to what I said earlier, that communication is not what you say. Communication is what the other understood. Now, a very good advice I always give to youngsters who may not have that much experience, which is quite handy because your experience kind of helps you to see the things that are not being said. But if you do not have that experience, well, you cannot know what has not been said. So what's the best way to find out what you do not know and has not been said? Ask questions. And if you propose something, ask questions. Did I see this well? Is this a solution that will work? So train your youngsters that you help into the world of employment, ask questions. There may be stupid answers, but there are very few stupid questions. So you should not be ashamed of asking questions. And by the way, asking a question inherently means you're interested in the topic and you're interested in the other person. So the new ABC we also need to know on top of basic literacy and numeracy is the ABC that stands for the impact of our actions, behaviors, and choices on the very environment that we depend on. We need nature. Nature does not need us. We need nature. And we've made a big mess of it. We've reached lots of positive achievements as well, but it comes at a price. So the next generation has to figure out what's the best balance, what's the best way to correct things. Now, indeed, as Jan earlier referred to, I have worked in the energy industry. And as you know, there's a lot of protest going on now that is called Just Stop Oil. And we actually made a small podcast to explain why Just Stop Oil as a goal cannot be achieved. It is as impossible as taking out one spaghetti of your plate without moving all the other spaghettis. What is possible is to just stop oil as the result of a societal transformation in which we actually reduce our energy metabolism in such a way that the reduced amount of energy we need can actually be provided by renewables. That's why we can stop oil. But we cannot stop oil tomorrow because our entire system is like the spaghetti plate in which it is interwoven very intricately. Jan, I would want to stop here if that's all right with you, and then leave some time for questions. I hope I've said sufficient thought-provoking things for your audience.
Yes, thank you so much, Hans. As always, very insightful, very complex topics with very easy words. It was a delight. And now you actually put some pressure on us because you said we have to ask the right questions. Let's see. I would ask you one question, and then maybe I will take questions from others, so you can already think about what you want to ask, Hans. You mentioned so many things. Just to recap very briefly, like the management input, the transition, the output, systemic thinking with the capital letters, the enormous shortage of STEM skills, also a lot of barriers, shortages in the education system, and in terms of climate change, the actions we need to take now, and the urgency to reorient it, our education system, our economy, our thinking, and our questioning. Here's my question. You were talking about this pipeline of STEM skills, and where would you see in this pipeline the weakest spot? Is it about early orientation, really getting young people interested in the topics in the first place? Is it about how you teach STEM skills, or is it about how you then make usage of them on the labor market, or rather lifelong learning aspect? Where, if you had a magic stick to fix one issue around STEM skills, where would you start?
Well, it would be the first two, because the latter one, of course, comes on later. Actually, I mean, young people are remarkably interested in everything. You know, when my kids were little, we went to a forest, you know, or saw, how do you call that in English, a seesaw, you know, where you can sit on hands, and said, okay, let's do that. No, you can't do it because you're much too heavy. I said, I'll show you. So they sat in the seat. And of course, I did not sit in the other seat because then I would be too heavy. But I sat halfway and it worked perfectly. And he was amazed. And I said, now, can you explain? Yeah, but this is not honest because you're not sitting in the seat. I said, no, but it works now, right? Can you explain to me why it works? And actually, they were only like 4 or 5 years old, but they could actually figure out, without using the word lever, the length of the distance of the turning point. They were able to fathom it out. I've got a very good trick. I mean, if you work with young people, you can try this next weekend. So the trick is this. You take a kid and you tell them to stand with the back against the wall, including the heels. The heels and the bum and the back should be against the wall. And then I put a 10 franc, or you would put 10 euro note in front of them on the floor. And then you tell them, if you can pick it up without falling, you can keep it. No child can pick that up. It's physically impossible that you pick it up staying with your heels against the wall, because you have to bend over, and the point of gravity must be over the point of support. And as soon as you move the point of gravity away from the point of support, you fall over. So nobody ever has managed to do that. And then they're very frustrated and puzzled as well. Why is it that I cannot pick this up? And I say, okay, if you can explain to me why you cannot pick it up, you still get the 10 euros. And half the kids actually find out. They say, well, I can't put my bum back, you know, because I can't move my heels. And, you know, if I can't do that, then I will fall over. And they actually arrive at the principle that the point of gravity must always be above the point of support. So this is a very playful way how you can actually make young people interested in it. And the nice thing is, if you talk with them like that, and if you ask them questions, they will observe things that they didn't see before. So age-wise, yes, you're right. I mean, in most countries, we work as the age group 12 till 16, because in most European member states, at age of 16, you basically choose the final reduced set of topics that you will take on to the baccalaureate until 18. And so our mission is to make sure that more people will take a STEM topic, preferably 2 STEM topics, also for the last 2 years, for the impact on the brain. If later on they decide to study law or history or art, no problem, they have enjoyed those 2 years. Now, in some countries, our partners also work with upper classes of primary schools, so between 8 and 12, which actually is quite good, because children actually start at that age to kind of orient themselves. Do I want to do something caring, you know, caring for old people, or caring for nature, or do I want to actually do things with my hands, or maybe express myself with drawing? So children actually start orienting themselves. And at that moment in time, to at least offer them the beauty of systemic thinking, without using that word, of course, you know, actually you interest them. And the great thing is, if except Jan, I do not know any of you. But if I would really genuinely, out of the bottom of my heart, want to help you with what you are going to do in the next 3 years, but I don't know whether you're going to do mountain climbing or scuba diving. Well, if you come to Switzerland, you do mountain climbing, then I would give you perhaps like a hook or perhaps a rope or whatever. I would give something that helps you with what you want to do. But if you would do scuba diving, well, I would give you different things. You know, I lived in the Philippines and I'm a scuba diver myself. So if I do not know what you're going to do in the future, but I nevertheless want to give you something that will be useful, that's systemic thinking. Because systemic thinking is a generic capacity that you can use in virtually any situation. That is why I think that fostering systemic thinking skills or STEAM skills, and that's why I liked the title that you gave to this talk, Jan, Full Steam Ahead. That's exactly what we need in the 21st century. That is why I'm promoting that. And it is not only a pipeline during education, it's a lifelong pipeline as well. It takes me 10 years to convert a 12-year-old girl into a 22-year-old engineer. And then it takes another 10 years before this 22-year-old girl engineer is a 22-year-old policy advisor at the ministry. So it takes 20 years to make the impact. It's the same thing like trees. We talk a lot about regreening and reforestation. What's the best time to plant a tree? Well, obviously 50 years ago, you would have a lot of shadow, you would have a lot of apples, whatever. But if you didn't do it 40 years ago or 30 years ago, the next best thing is today. Yes, we have to wait. And it is an act of patience, but it's also an act where you know for 100% that you will not regret it. And in what you do is simply without regret, helping people with systemic thinking, helping them, equipping them. Well, I see many women, so you probably did not play with trains. Maybe Jan, you played with trains as well when you were little. The difficulty with playing with a miniature train set is to put the cars on the rails, because there are many wheels and all the wheels have to sit in the rails properly. So the beginning is the most difficult, but once the train is well on the rails with all the wheels, it will run around very easily. And so you are assisting young people to actually get the right fit into their new situation. And sometimes I make another analogy. I said, look, if you want to put on shoes, put in the toes first, not the heel first, because you can't get the shoes on your feet. Put the toes in first. So helping them, to make that first 3 months, that first 2 years go well, you actually are a great help for the remainder of the career. Now, of course, I've been advising quite a lot of young people who came to me and said, oh, Mr. van der Loo, I can get a new job and I can choose. I can do this job in Chile and that job in South Africa. What should I do? Well, I'm not going to decide for other young people what they do, of course. So what I do, which you probably do as well, I use the Socratian method by asking questions. Do you have a partner? Because if you do have a partner and that partner does not go with you, then maybe you do not want to be in a different time zone, because it's easier, let's say, if you're European, if the other one works in South Africa, then you're in the same time zone. And no, I either don't have a partner or my partner will go with me. And I would try other questions. And if at the end I could not nudge out a preference in their own mind, my final question always was, talk with your both future bosses. Don't pick the job. Don't pick the country, pick the boss. Pick the boss from whom you will learn most. Because bosses and employees are like marmalade jars and the lids. Not every lid fits on every jar, and not every jar fits with every lid. It's not because you are bad or your boss is bad, it may just not be so much of a fit. So the advice I would give to young people, if you come into a company, then obviously you don't have much choice, but work on a network, see who you may like, and most important, think in terms from whom could you learn most. People from whom you can learn a lot are great bosses.
Thanks, Hans. Maybe many would like to have you as a boss. That we are running a little bit out of time, so I would like to collect just a few more questions if we can do another round. I see Perla. Is there another hand up? Then Perla, have a go. Perla and then Julia.
Yes, I was just wondering, there's all this talking about STEM, and it's so important that people get these STEM skills. And I'm just wondering a little bit what if it is not something that's kind of going in the direction of making a very technocratic kind of society, and do you need to study scientific disciplines in order to have this systemic thinking? That's also one question I have, and because I sometimes get almost allergic to all this emphasis on STEM, and think, okay, but you need people who have this critical thinking, and maybe also the system. Some people who are very deep into the science don't have this systemic kind of view. So what would you say to that?
Well, I actually agree with you. I mean, my role, I now work in, I will not elaborate on that role, but I now work as part of the Blue Cooling Initiative a lot with scientists. And they say, oh, you're going to Brussels. Well, I'll give you a paper, then you can perhaps leave it with them. And then they sent me something of 18 pages, small print and money footnotes. And I tell them, no, I will not even print it because that's bad for nature. I'd rather keep the tree. You can send me something, but two pieces of paper, and you can cheat, you can print them on both sides. And by the way, it needs pictures and a good explanatory text on the picture. And I'm sorry to say to you, professor, doctor, engineer, scientist, that they will only look at the picture and the text underneath the picture. So you better make sure that's good. So people that are very good at STEM are often very bad explaining things, because people that make laws are typically people that studied law or history or economics. They do not have a systemic mindset, but yet they have to make the right laws. So I'm very liberal in this sense, Perla. I think if you think about how can I touch somebody with beauty, with a colorful work of art, or something that you say beautifully. I mean, I started out this talk with a sentence that, of course, I thought about, talent is our most precious resource. We need to address our most pressing challenges. You got precious and pressing. So you think about the words that they run well, they come across well. That is not systemic thinking. That is more art or literature. So I think, if you are simply observing nature, simply sit down in your garden and see what's happening. If you would do that for a couple of hours, you would learn a lot. That's called osmotic learning by osmosis. But I will also stay firm in saying that the education on STEM is the most explicit way in which you can actually help people to develop systemic thinking skills. But you're right, it's not the only way to learn it.
And a final question from Julia then.
Yes, thank you so much for the inspirational thought, because and I also found it really fun. Actually, I really enjoyed it. But I was thinking about youngsters and what you said before about the motivation to keep the difficult challenges in order to, maintain a motivation in young people. But actually, maybe what is really missing from my perspective of someone who really works with youth, with the one that are really at risk of not finding their own pathway in life, and so losing their talents and their vocation, is also the missing of role model to get inspired to. So my question is, how can we maintain the motivation even if in the role models, in us as leaders and trainings and inspiration for them? How can we maintain the motivation in the adults?
Well, that's actually going back to what Perla earlier said. I think your ability to do that actually emanates not from engineering for STEM skills, but for a deep interest in people, i.e. your pupils or the students in your class. I think, children and young people can feel whether you're really interested in them or that they are just a number, And if you make them feel that you are really interested as a human being, you basically open the connection. You can actually communicate. And if forgive me for making the analogy, if you have no pipeline connection, you cannot move content from A to B. You need to invest both in the content. Of course, this talk was about the content, but you also need to have the relationship or the conduit. And the stronger the relationship is, i.e. the bigger the diameter of the pipeline is, the thicker the walls of the pipeline, the more pressure you can put, and you can move much more stuff from A to B. Now forget about the metals, forget about the pipeline, think about the relationship between people. If a young person trusts you, likes you, then the potential for you to convey things and to give advice gets much bigger. Because remember, as I said earlier on, communication is not what you say. Communication is what the other understands. So for you, it's important that once you've explained something, that you ask him or her back, what did you hear? What did you understand? What are the points that you took out from this? First of all, you respect the person because you expect an answer. It gives you feedback as well. So that gives you an opportunity to actually look for, hey, oh, this you misunderstood, or indeed very well, you understood that very well. And in having that two-way communication, you also give a sense of fulfillment of the other, because the other can show to you, wow, I really understood part of it. And oh yeah, I was not clear about that one. So there's a win-win situation, because you find out what they did not know, you can then tell them, and because you ask them, the other can have a say as well. But what I'm talking about now, Julia, is I think the very basics of interpersonal communications. And we are mildly intelligent, but highly social apes. So the social dimension, the humanity part, that is the most important. If that connection is not there, you cannot convey any content.
Yeah, Hans, thank you so much for so many inputs, ideas, inspirational quotes, and images also, really making things more simple or more understandable than they might seem for some. So I think this has been a great talk and input for everyone. Thank you for your time. If in the follow-up something emerges, I would take the freedom to again reach out to you. And yeah, just wishing you the best of luck with your work, because it's crucial, both on the STEM skills as well as on the blue cooling. So thanks a lot, and talk to you soon.
Well, thank you, Jan, very much indeed. Maybe I can say one final thing. Sometimes people say, oh yeah, but you stand so big because you do all these things. I do not stand big. If it seems that I stand big, it is because I'm standing on the shoulders of others. I've had extraordinary good luck with loving parents and some very good teachers. They were not all good, but some were really good and really motivational. And to me, that has led to the following slogan. Actually, I did not make it up. Einstein actually made it up. It's one of his lesser well-known slogans. But I was at a conference like 3 or 4 years ago, and somebody showed it, and I said, wow. That is my slogan. And the slogan is the following: those that have the privilege to know have the duty to act. I wish you a very good continuation of your meeting. And Jan, you know how to find me. And if I can help with this good cause, nurturing and looking after the most precious thing we have, talent, to tackle the most pressing challenges we have, you can always count on me. I wish you a good continuation of your meeting.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Yes, I hope this was a good experience for you, a good talk.